On the night of 18th of March 2016, the Rostov-on-Don approach airspace became the scene of an air disaster involving a Boeing 737 operated by Flydubai. Unfortunately, all 62 passengers and crew on board lost their lives. It's 2 a.m. and we are in the Rostov's airspace. It is at this time that flight number 981, traveling from Dubai to Rostov, starts its pre-estimated descent from flight level.
Sky Dubai 981, for your information, we have SIGMET in our area from surface up to flight level 150 or 47 turbulence, wind 240 degrees 11, gusts 15 meters per second.
The captain, 38-year-old Cypriot Aristos-Sokratos, starts the descent following the Echo Romeo 22 Alpha approach. He has 6,000 hours of flight experience, out of which 5,000 were done on the Boeing 737. Aristos had been working as an aircraft captain for the last 1.5 years, and he was planning to switch airlines and accept a job offer from Ryanair. Alejandro Alovo-Cruz is a 37-year-old pilot from Spain. Alejandro had 5,700 flight hours, but mostly on light turboprop aircrafts. He had only 1,000 hours of real flight experience on the Boeing 737. According to Flydubai's instructions, only the captain is allowed to perform takeoff and landings at Rostov. The crew continues the descent, reaching strong turbulence at an altitude of 800 meters. The captain disengages the autopilot and auto throttle, switching to manual controls.
It should die at some point.
The aircraft breaks through the clouds, and the captain sees the runway ahead. Once they reached 335 meters, the predictive wind shear warning system sounded a go-around wind shear ahead alarm. It was, however, only a prediction. Note that the actual wind shear alarm never went off at any time during the flight. The crew reacts in a split second. To avoid ending up in a wind shear and being blown off the trajectory, the captain initiates a go-around maneuver without changing the aircraft's configuration. The flight crew's training was readily apparent. Starting a go-around from 330 meters left only 370 meters that they needed to climb in order to reach their target flight level of 700 meters. Such an altitude can be easily overshot due to the captain applying full thrust to the engines and the lack of a full passenger load. The Boeing's engines are placed lower than its center of gravity, which means that the aircraft tends to nose up at full thrust. This results in a pitch-up effect, causing the captain to counteract by pushing the control column forward. At the same time, the crew is still not allowed to climb above 700 meters. These actions resulted in a drastically increased airspeed, which was noted by the first officer.
Check the speed.
Speed checked.
They overshoot their target altitude and have to counteract by descending, which prompts the captain to nose down the aircraft. He pushes the stabilizer trim switch for 4 seconds, which decreases the pitch up to 3 to 4 degrees. This in turn once again adds to the speed from 160 knots to 175 knots, going over the limits set for flying with flaps at 30. As a result, this engages the automatic flap retraction to level 25. Half a minute later, the plane not only reaches the target altitude, but despite the crew's actions, continues to climb. Due to the auto retraction of flaps, the overspeed turned out not to be critical, and it was later discussed by the crew while in the holding pattern.
How was the go-round? It was a mess or was okay?
That's okay. The only thing is that the speed went to barber pole, but it's normal because we had the wind shear.
Yeah. What do you mean on the go-round?
No, after the go-around during the climb.
Yeah.
Did you notice the speed grow? It sort of reached the reds.
Did we end up on the red?
Went almost into the reds, maybe 1 or 2 knots, but it's nothing. You have a 15 knots to get into red. Go-around was good.
Yeah.
The aircraft is now on flight level 80, altitude of 2.5 kilometers, and Aristos-Sokratos has not made up his mind yet whether he should start a second approach or to move off into a holding pattern. At the same time, Aeroflot's Superjet 1166 which is arriving from Moscow, attempts the landing at Rostov, but then also reports a go-around at 600 meters due to wind shear. Given the conditions, the Flydubai captain decides to wait it out. The aircraft had taken on additional fuel due to the higher fuel costs at Rostov compared to the Dubai airport. It had enough fuel for over 2 hours of flight in a holding pattern, as well as the return flight. Due to icing, Aristos decided to orbit to the north of the airport. But it took time for him to explain their intentions to the ATC, whose English did not correspond with the required ICAO level. The crew had to repeat the same messages over and over again. In return, they received unclear responses from the controller. At some point, there was even another ATC rep trying to intervene. Finally, the crew gave up on it.
Leave it. It's we do whatever they say. Once we are not happy, we just go and that's it.
Eventually, given the area restrictions, the ATC refused to let the crew orbit in the north and sent them to a holding area in the southeast. As for the Aeroflot Superjet 1166, it attempted a third landing, but once again goes around due to wind shear, leaving for an alternate airport in Krasnodar. This information is passed on to Aristos, but he decides to wait until the weather clears, taking into account that the forecast is optimistic. In fact, weather conditions at 2 alternate airports were favorable, which gave the crew peace of mind in case they had to bail on their current attempts. Nevertheless, opting for an alternate airport had its own problems. It would have been an unexpected landing, the passengers would have to be accommodated, the aircraft's timetable would be completely revised, and this would carry both costs for the company and the crew. Obviously, these circumstances motivated the captain to land at their intended destination, Rostov-on-Don. According to Aristos, it would simply not be wise to attempt a landing at another airport. He thought that if the first go-around alarm had not sounded, they would already have landed safely on their first approach.
It was okay, man, but it called wind shear. It was okay, to be honest.
The plane has now been in the holding pattern for over an hour. They constantly monitor the weather, seeking out a window for landing. The captain is in contact with the company via SATCOM and was proceeding with a long discussion. During the discussion, the company's management agrees with the captain's decision. They recommend Mineralnie Vody as an alternate airport and sent a flight plan to the crew. At one point, the captain left the cockpit, and the first officer started to express his concerns regarding the flight to a cabin attendant.
All the aircraft have left. We're the only one left here doing nonsense.
Where did they go?
I don't know, because there was an airfloat. And I don't know about the other. They left. They went to their other destination. We have fuel enough, but I don't think that, with such a weather, if it keeps being bad, it's not worth it. Actually, I don't understand when they plan this type of flights to this Russian place at night, when they already know, during the daytime, that there was a shit weather. They plan it at night.
1 hour and 40 minutes later, the captain decides to try landing again.
Dubai, number 81822. Wind 30 degrees, 14 meters per second, Mach 18 meters per second, visibility 630 meters.
It seems that nothing much has changed since their first approach. But the crew is executing all the necessary steps according to their training and experience. Taking into account the circumstances of the first aborted landing, the pilots informed the ATC that they will climb to a flight level of 80 in case of another go-around. With both the autopilot and auto throttle engaged, the plane starts to descend. Then, at an altitude of 1,100 meters, they hit an area of turbulence, and the vertical G-force starts to jump from 0.75 to 1.4 Gs. At an altitude of 600 meters and 21 kilometers from the runway, the ILS system captures the approach beacon and sets the heading for the runway. They intercept the glide path radio beacon, allowing the autopilot to control the altitude as well, directing the plane towards the runway. The gears are extended and, at an altitude of 575 meters, the captain disengages the autopilot and auto throttle. He is now flying the plane manually. The altitude is now 300 meters and the plane is configured for landing. Flaps are at 30 degrees, landing gear down, and the heading deviation is within tolerance. The only thing left was to decrease airspeed from 163 knots to 153 knots. They are now slightly higher than the glide slope, and the captain pushes the control column forward a little and increases thrust to get back on the path. It is at this moment that they get struck by wind shear, and as a result, the speed within seconds jumps to 168 knots, and 2 seconds later, it reaches 176 knots, which is more than 20 knots higher than their target speed. Despite that, the crew seems to be in control.
Check the speed.
Okay, go around.
Go around.
A 15-knot increase of speed at an altitude lower than 300 meters is considered to be an unacceptable deviation, making the crew initiate a go-around from an altitude of 250 meters. They activate TOGA mode, increasing the engine thrust to the max, which combined with flaps and gear retraction, prompted an increased pitch-up effect, a much stronger one compared to the first go-around. The significant increase of pitch-up momentum tends to increase the pitch angle and leads to a nose-up attitude. Aristos tries to maintain the required 15-degree climb angle. In these quickly changing conditions, he seems to delay every decision he makes. He cannot keep a constant pitch angle averaging 10 degrees, while the aircraft is still in full thrust and still lightweight. These factors increase the speed, but this time even faster, because both flaps and gears are up, and Aristos cannot keep track of it all. The first officer directs the captain's attention to the required pitch angle, and they both fall into a tunnel effect. Then they stop paying attention to everything else. They are simply too concentrated on the climb. The number of parameters they now monitor decreases down to 1 or 2 at most. The pilots don't see that the speed is now 200 knots, which is once again over the limit of the flaps, prompting the auto retraction to mode 10, just like the first time. To push the yoke forward, the captain has to apply over 23 kilograms of force. And he must do it with his left hand only, while his right hand is on the thrust levers. An unbalanced plane always puts higher psycho-emotional pressure on pilots, and in order to free the yoke from these forces, Aristos pushes the stabilizer switch forward to pitch down. This can only be done for short periods of time, and the yoke typically must be returned to neutral. But the captain fails to take this step. From this moment, at an altitude of 935 meters, a critical situation starts to unfold. As a result of the yoke kept in its forward position with engaged stabilizers, the plane pitches down and transitions to a steep descent. This creates a zero-gravity effect in the cabin, which remains for quite some time, making all unsecured objects levitate, including dust and dirt. This happens suddenly and frightens the crew, stimulating Aristos to lose spatial orientation as he keeps pushing the stabilizer switch for 12 seconds, which is too long and, as it turned out, deadly for this specific flight. The plane enters a steep dive. Aristos, under the huge pressure and stress he is in, pulls up and then pushes the yoke forward again. The first officer tries to get the captain out of his mental loop, but Aristos doesn't react. He loses all control of the situation and capability of piloting the aircraft. At a 50 degrees pitch angle and full speed, the aircraft is rushing towards the ground. A pull-up alarm starts blaring in the cockpit, but instead of pulling up, the captain turns the yoke left.
Yeah, be careful now. Oh shit! Be careful! No, 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 no! Don't do that! Don't do that! No, pull it! Pull it! Pull it! My God!
with a vertical speed of 91 meters per second and left banking at 60 degrees. The plane crashes into the ground. Human error became the official reason of this air disaster. All the way until the second approach, the captain showed high professionalism and acted as a true leader for the crew. Still, soon after the decision to perform the second approach, he fell into a non-optimal, psycho-emotional state. The crew was prepared for the second go-around, but landing at the destination airport turned into the dominant goal for the captain. In order to reach it, they spent 2 hours orbiting in a holding pattern. And the captain was confident that he could land the plane if the wind shear alarm didn't go off. It was the wind shear alarm that was meant to switch him into an operational state to execute a successful go-around. Instead, the speed jump triggered the go-around. Although mentally, the captain was focused on landing the plane. Aristos just couldn't handle the difficulties of landing at the destination airport or going for an alternate airport, ending up in a psychological conflict between landing the plane or performing another go-around. The captain did initiate a go-around, but the mechanics behind it never fully formed in his mind. This made him lose situational awareness, forming a psychological conflict which led to his subsequent leadership and piloting mistakes. The captain's wrong actions came from the fact that the trigger for the go-around was not what he expected. The activation of a wind shear alarm should have been the trigger to perform the maneuver. The following loss of spatial awareness and his inability to make the right decisions was most likely caused by the zero gravity effect that the captain was not ready for. Moreover, a lack of manual stabilizer control experience resulted in keeping the stabilizer switch pressed for too long, which in turn directed the plane down and towards the ground. The first officer's reaction was adequate, and he understood exactly what was going on, giving the captain correct prompts at all stages. He even tried to intervene in the control. Unfortunately, due to the captain's drastically wrong piloting inputs, it was simply too late. During the reconstruction sessions in flight simulators, the instructor pilot noted that the first officer needed to be more confident and assertive, letting the captain know of his mistakes without starting an argument. Other negative factors included operational tiredness, as the crew had been flying for 6 hours, 2 of which were filled with busy and stress-filled go-around procedures and critical decision-making. The air disaster happened at 4:42 a.m. Dubai time, which is the worst time from a personal biorhythm point of view when a person's operational capacity is at its lowest and the risk of potential errors increase. According to Aristos Socrates' colleagues, one of the reasons why he wanted to resign and move to Ryanair was overworking. This reconstruction is based on the official IAC report and serves as its video version, with the only difference is that it does not include the HUD display.